Thursday, December 21st. Great to have you with us. Also with us, we have White House editor for Politico, Sam Stein, who intimidates people who work for him to say that he's their favorite at Politico. We heard that, Sam. Also, MsNbC contributor Mike Barnicle, Washington bureau chief for the USA Today, Susan Page, and staff writer at The Atlantic, Mark Leibovich. President Biden made his first remarks yesterday about the Colorado Supreme Court ruling that Donald Trump's disqualified from that state's 2024 primary ballot because of his role in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. In Milwaukee, Biden initially refused to comment, but then said this when asked if Trump supported an insurrection.
Well, I think certainly it's self-evident. You saw it all. Now, whether the 14th Amendment applies, I'll let the court make that decision. But he certainly supported an insurrection. And no question about it. None. Zero. And he seems to be doubling down on about everything. Anyway, I've got to go do this.
By the way, there's nothing controversial about that. I mean, Mike Barnicle, we all saw it with our own eyes. This is one of those moments where, what are you going to believe me, or are you going to believe your lying eyes? Americans saw this with their eyes. They understand that Donald Trump did, in fact, take part, lead, encourage an insurrection to take place. They know that he told people that they needed to storm the Capitol. They needed to stop the count. He got extraordinarily angry with the Secret Service when they stopped him from going up there because he wanted to march on the floor. He wanted to be in the center of the insurrection. And Mike, you know, it's so maddening when Donald Trump talks about the, quote, hostages, and how grotesque to say that, well, what's going on in Israel. But Donald Trump talks about the hostages that are being held. He talks about letting people who beat the hell out of cops out of jail after he gets there. The reason why is every time they come up, it's glaringly obvious. Donald Trump still has escaped justice. Donald Trump is not in jail for committing insurrection, which we all know he did. Americans know he did. But he's out of jail because he's rich and powerful. Those people being in jail, those working Americans that followed his instructions and told the judges they were just following his insurrection instructions, they're in jail because they're not rich and powerful like Donald Trump. So yeah, he committed insurrection. Yes. If there were justice already, he'd be a lot more concerned about things than just not being on the Colorado Republican ballot. He'd be concerned because he should be in jail.
Well, Joe, you know, the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. In this case, the proof is on the videotape. Like old sports house announcers used to say, let's go to the videotape and take a look. Donald Trump did indeed support and promote an insurrection, and everybody in America and everybody in the world saw it play out. It was not a great day for democracy, certainly not a great day for this country. And Donald Trump is still, he has yet to pay a price, Joe, not only for all of this, he really, in effect, has not paid a price for anything over the past 30 to 35 or 40 years that he was in business in New York. He's never been touched by the law. He has always avoided it with delays and obfuscation and lying, and he's still at large around the country. The sad part is he has enormous support, considering the large country we live in and the amount of people in this country who pay attention to politics, but not really all of politics. And the Colorado ruling, sadly, as legitimate as some people think it is more or less a get-out-the-vote operation for Donald Trump, for his people. Well, and it's kind of disturbing.
Well, you know, it may be a get-out-the-vote operation. There are those of us, and I've said it all along, I know it's irritating to people who just think that politics is about everything and men are above the law, but we either have a Constitution or we don't have a Constitution. Here's the factual question. Did Donald Trump commit insurrection?
Yes.
If Donald Trump committed insurrection, then, as Judge Luttig said yesterday, it's not anti-democratic to follow the Constitution of the United States and Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. That's, in fact, the most pro-democratic thing that can be done. Stay with me, because if, in fact, he committed insurrection against the United States. This is the ultimate protectorate of that democracy. I understand it's sad and it's pathetic that people will say, oh, Trump derangement syndrome, oh this, oh that on other networks. They're going to be trying to confuse you. They're going to be trying to move the ball. They're going to be trying to confuse their own viewers, which they do quite regularly, quite often. Fact is, the Constitution is crystal clear. If a court finds, as a Colorado court found, Donald Trump committed insurrection against the United States government, then you either follow the Constitution or you don't. And you can talk about democracy all you want. I'm sure people that were following Hitler were talking about democracy a lot. I don't know. Mussolini, everybody can, I guess they can go and wave the banner of democracy around when it's actually the opposite of democracy. Actually, the opposite of democracy. Committing insurrection against the United States Constitution, trying to actually steal a presidential election. Move of the Colorado Supreme Court's decision to kick Donald Trump off the state's 2024 presidential primary ballot. 54% of Americans approve of it. Only 35% of Americans disapprove of it. The survey conducted by YouGov America found that 84% of Democrats, 48% of independents, 48% of independents, and 24% of Republicans approved of the ruling. And Mike, do polls dictate what courts should do? No. No, they don't. But when you have Donald Trump and people who want an authoritarian taking control of Washington, D.C. again, saying, oh, this is a radical decision, this is anti-democratic, when in fact it's just the opposite, that poll is just one snapshot to show the majority of Americans are like, yeah, you know what? He shouldn't be on the ballot because he committed insurrection against the United States.
You know, Joe, I don't disagree with the word you said. I fully subscribe to all of it. My problem is I'm conflicted. I'm torn about it because we are a country of habit. We do things by habit. We have certain days, Memorial Day, July 4th. It's habit what we do in those days. One of the habits that we all share is Election Day, and it's voting people on or out of office. And I would think now the courts have spoken in Colorado. Other courts will speak. The Supreme Court will likely speak within the next month, certainly, maybe sooner. I mean, the habit people have of voting, that's the way to do in Donald Trump. That's the way to do him in. It's up to the Democratic Party, President Biden's party, his campaign for re-election to do the job, to help us do the job, to get rid of him, not the courts.
I completely understand what you're saying. But when the habit, Susan Page, of voting peacefully is broken for the first time since the Civil War by somebody that wants to stop the peaceful transition of power, that habit, that norm is broken by Donald Trump. That said, I completely understand what Mike Barnichel's saying. And Susan, you've been in Washington almost as long as me. And I'm sure you understand, and I know you've thought about it an awful lot. This Supreme Court, this Roberts Supreme Court, they have a massive decision to make. And I think if it were just a law review article being written, they would probably come down on the side of the Colorado Supreme Court. But with all the implications that Mike's talking about, I just think how hard it's going to be. And I know people don't understand this, but how hard it's going to be for the United States Supreme Court to get there, even if it's the legally correct thing to do under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Just the real-life implications are going to be so massive. I think an institutionalist like John Roberts and his court is going to have a hard time getting there.
Yeah, for sure, a tough decision. Do we think it might be a 9-0 decision instead of a 5-4 decision? You know, possibly that would be reassuring, I think, for a lot of Americans, whichever way it went. You know, I think back to the 2000 election, which was decided by the Supreme Court with a 5-4 decision along what amounted to partisan lines on the court. And what strikes me about the time since then is how, after that court decision came down, it was accepted by Al Gore, even though he'd won the popular vote. It was accepted by most Americans. There was not rioting in the streets over an election being stolen. What if the court came out with a decision this time around, 5-4, closely divided, largely along partisan lines, that went one way or the other? With a 5-4 decision, it would probably go Trump's way. Maybe it wouldn't. Would the country accept it in the same way that the country accepted the court decision in 2000, I am skeptical that that would happen. I think the consequences would be considerably more serious.
I agree with you. It's been a rocky 23 years since that Supreme Court decision that decided the 2000 race. Here's former Attorney General Barr, who's usually critical of what Donald Trump did on October 6th. And in the days following, January 6th, January 6th and the days following. Also, yesterday, he was very critical of Donald Trump's racist language that channeled Adolf Hitler. We'll show you that clip in a little bit. But here is Barr, former Attorney General Barr, opposing the Colorado decision, saying it only helps Donald Trump. Take a look.
I think that this case is legally wrong and untenable. And I think this kind of action of stretching the law, taking these hyper-aggressive positions to try to knock Trump out of the race are counterproductive. They backfire. As you know, he feeds on grievance, just like a fire feeds on oxygen. And this is going to end up as a grievance that helps him.
Again, this is Mark Leibovich. This is it's a fascinating legal question. He said two things there. Barr said it was legally wrong. I actually disagree with him there, and I think a lot of legal scholars, of which I am not one, but a lot of legal scholars would disagree with the former Attorney General that it's legally wrong. I think a lot of them might agree on the second thing he said, which is untenable. And I know that a lot of people are watching and they're noting the friction and go, wait a second, you're saying that it may be legally correct but untenable at the same time? That's exactly what I'm saying, Mark, because of the consequences. I mean, I would hope that the Supreme Court could put on blinders and say, this is a law. We're going to apply Section 3 of the 14th Amendment in the way that it was written. But again, I think if there's any ambiguity, the court, maybe in a 9-0 fashion, is going to rush to that ambiguity, even if that's not legally correct.
Yeah, I think the notion of grievance in this context is frankly a political construct, right? I mean, Donald Trump has used grievance to his political advantage, and the legal aspect of this is yeah, I mean, it's obviously very contentious, and it's something that is going to be, you know, argued up the ladder. I mean, I think, though, that, you know, ultimately, I think most Americans would think that this should be decided by voters. I mean, whether they theoretically agree with the court case, most people haven't, you know, really read terribly closely, is one thing. But, I mean, I think voters shouldn't get off the hook that easily. I mean, I think that's the view of a lot of people who disagree with this decision, whether they disagree for political reasons, practical reasons, what have you. But ultimately, you know, voters need to weigh in on Donald Trump at some point, and Joe Biden, too. But whatever wherever the election comes out as in next November, it's going to have to be some kind of national consensus, and it's very messy. It might not even be an electoral consensus. But ultimately, I mean, I think the court here is, you know, I guess what Attorney General Barr was saying is that it kind of muddles the issue a little bit. It does turn it political inherently, and, you know, it probably is not going to save us ultimately from what's going to be an extremely messy election.
Yeah, Joe, let me just add a couple things here. One is that, you know, Barr said, you know, he obviously disagreed with the decision. He said it's stretching the law. And maybe so, but I think it's worth noting that the law is being stretched not by the people who have brought this case forward. It's being stretched by Trump, right? I mean, Trump brought this issue upon himself by his actions on January 6th. We've never had to debate these legal issues in the 14th Amendment's third clause before because, frankly, we've never had a president involved in inciting an insurrection before. So this is the situation we have ourselves in. Secondly is that, you know, there's probably a lot of public misconception about this, but this case is, yes, it's being cheered on by some liberal judicial activists, but it's being brought forward by longtime conservative activists. Obviously, they are critical of Trump, but these aren't, you know, like, you know, Ralph Nader types. These are people who worked for the Federalist Society, so that's also to consider. But also, finally, to Mark's point, when you take the temperature of even Democrats, I mean, I thought the most interesting thing yesterday was just how quiet Democrats were about this. They're not cheering it. They recognize that it's a tinderbox politically for them to say, yeah, let's let the courts, knock Trump off the ballot. It looks like they're kind of engineering Trump's defeat. Dean Phillips, who's challenging Biden, said he disagreed with the decision. I think the general consensus politically is that this can't be held up, that it has to be decided at the ballot box. But, just to underscore your point, Joe, I think there is a seriousness to the challenge and the legal issues at hand that Barr probably dismisses too kindly.
Well, he does dismiss way too kindly. I understand the political impact of this. There are a couple of laughable arguments, though, that if you hear somebody saying today, feel free to mock them. Don't mock them. I'm just joking. It's the Christmas season. Be sweet and maybe just gently correct them. The number one thing is that this is some kind of leftist plot. This is not a leftist plot. This idea, this law review paper, this approach was actually framed by two highly respected members of the Federalist Society. People that the new members of the Supreme Court that were appointed by Donald Trump know all too well and have read all too often. To just simply dismiss this as some sort of left-wing legal conspiracy. So, Sam, you're exactly right. I think Bill Barr was wrong to dismiss it out of hand and saying it was, quote, stretching the law. It's not stretching the law. The second thing is, again, how anybody that supports Donald Trump could say with a straight face that this is anti-democratic. As Sam said again, this goes back to January the 6th. The most anti-democratic actions that were taken against the United States of America since Fort Sumter. And the very people that continue to support that insurrection and promise us if Donald Trump's elected again, spare me the anti-democratic lectures. What a joke. Anyway, when we come back, we already showed you some of what former Attorney General Barr said about this case. We're going to show you what he said about Donald Trump's poisoning of the blood fascist rhetoric. Also going to show you some of the more mealy-mouthed responses from...
work to do. When they let, I think the real number is 15, 16 million people into our country, when they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country. We have no idea who any of them are. They come from Africa. They come from Asia. They come from South America. And it's true. They're destroying the blood of our country. That's what they're doing. They're destroying our country. They don't like it when I said that. And I never read Mein Kampf. They said, oh, Hitler said that in a much different way. No, they're coming from all over the world, people all over the world. We have no idea. They could be healthy. They could be very unhealthy. They could bring in disease that's going to catch on in our country, but they do bring in crime. But they have them coming from all over the world, and they're destroying the blood of our country. They're destroying the fabric of our country, and we're going to have to get them out.
So a couple of quick corrections here. By the way, that is rhetoric. That is eerily reminiscent of what Adolf Hitler said. Donald Trump said he never read Mein Kampf. Perhaps he never read Mein Kampf. I don't know. I do know that Ivana Trump said that he kept a book of Hitler's speeches by his bedside. Told Vanity Fair that. So maybe it's not Mein Kampf, but he's certainly channeling that book that Ivana Trump said he kept by his bedside. That was some of Donald Trump's worst rhetoric lately, and of course, there's quite a hearty competition for the worst things that he's been saying recently. But that was some, and this is some of Donald Trump's 2024 opponents who are lobbing mild criticisms at Trump for his repeated fascist rhetoric, talking about migrants poisoning the blood of our country. In an interview released yesterday by the Christian Broadcasting Network, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said this.
When you start talking about using those types of terms, I don't think that helps us move the ball forward. I would not put it in those terms.
A former UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, gave a similar response, telling the Des Moines Register yesterday that Trump's remark was, quote, just not helpful. Compare that to former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who in a CNN interview Sunday called Donald Trump's quote disgusting for the comments and said he was dog whistling to Americans. I don't know that it's a dog whistle as much as a foghorn. When you're quoting Hitler, I think we've moved beyond the dog whistling stage. More than dogs can hear Hitler rhetoric. And here is what former Trump Attorney General Bill Barr had to say yesterday about it.
I'm offended by it because it has racist overtones. I actually feel, as you say, we have to control the border, and a lot of people coming across the border from anywhere in the world, we don't know where they're coming from. But at the end of the day, the fact of the matter is that the Hispanic Americans that have come up from South America have made great citizens. You know, they have strong values, they're entrepreneurial. My son-in-law was a Marine combat officer, and he said the best Marines in his unit in Iraq were recent Hispanic immigrants. So I don't like these racist overtones. In the broad sweep of history, the fact that we have a reservoir to our south of these people who come out of the Western tradition, they're religious people, good family people in general, is a boon to the United States. Does that mean they all are like that? No. And does bringing in a lot of people at once from a different country, does that put strains on our system and harm the country to an extent? Yes, it does. But the attacks on the idea that they pollute our blood, I think are foul.
Yeah, you know who he sounds a lot like is Ronald Reagan. I know that Trump Republicans probably don't understand that because they probably don't read Ronald Reagan, what Ronald Reagan said, or ever listen to what Ronald Reagan used to say. But that's exactly what Reagan said. In fact, he said it in his farewell address to Americans, how important immigrants are to the core of this country. I'm so glad also he brought up the fact that Hispanic Americans are some of the bravest, some of the toughest, some of the best fighters that we have in uniform. And I've heard that time and again. So it is interesting, Susan Page, while some of the condemnations may not have been as full-throated as some would like, it is interesting that most Republicans now do feel comfortable, at least these presidential candidates, and at least condemning him for what Bill Barr said was foul language.
I don't know if I would give them that much credit. Nikki Haley, the child of immigrants, she just says they're not helpful. I mean, these are dehumanizing comments with a fascistic history, poisoning the blood of our country. Earlier, former President Trump had referred to them as vermin. This is language we know something about in not so long ago of our history. So how can it not be denounced in a really full-throated way? Why are the candidates who most want to replace him as the Republican nominee not calling this out in a more serious way? It says something about the state of the Republican Party and the hold that Trump continues to have on its voters.
Well, and to me, it says something about the sort of centrality of immigration and fears of immigration in Trump's appeal. I mean, this has been the sort of bedrock principle of Trumpism from the get-go, starting with the Muslim ban to the attacks on justices over their nationality. And I don't know, Mark, you followed the guy for a while. I'm kind of curious biographically, like prior to his political days, where does this come from? What has informed his thinking on this? Or is this all sort of a plain, crass political calculation that you think he's making?
I mean, I think both. I mean, first of all, we're immigrants.
Right.
I guess.
Although that's not that that tends to happen sometimes, where you have a familial connection to an immigrant and you just say things that are blatantly anti-immigrant. But anyway, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
That is true. No, I think there's obviously a political calculation. I think there's a visceral calculation here. I think it also, he kind of comes up from a world of ethnic politics and ethnic friction. I mean, that's kind of the whole melting pot of New York, and it's often, very vibrant and very dynamic, but it also can be turned on its head, and it can be an incredibly divisive notion that can be used quite cynically. So, I don't know, I would just say that it would not it would not kill me never to hear the expression, "That's not helpful," again, from politicians. I mean, the idea that everything must be helpful. And you're right, though. I do think it goes to the level of passivity that is the anti-Trump resistance in the Republican Party, which has frankly been abysmal, as we've all said.
Well, and Mike Barnacle, Susan Page brings up a great point. For Nikki Haley to just say it's not helpful when she is the daughter of immigrants, somebody that has seen firsthand the American dream and seen how important immigrants are to the American dream. Well, you know, just like Donald Trump's mom was an immigrant, just like 2 of Donald Trump's 3 wives were immigrants, just like Nikki Haley's parents were immigrants. I mean, we have, just like people who have made and remade Silicon Valley are immigrants. We can go down the list of people who we see on TV, people who impact our world, people who make America stronger and more vibrant, in the words of Ronald Reagan. And they're immigrants. So I take Susan's point. Not helpful is not helpful. She needs to say more.
Everybody needs to say more. I mean, think about what we've been talking about here for 20 minutes. This country is in a state of turmoil. Who caused the turmoil? Largely, Donald Trump caused the turmoil because of his behavior, because of who he is and what he does. So the question is for all of us as Americans, not the politicians, all of us as regular Americans, to ask, how did we get here? How did a guy with a 40-year record of being a fraud skate on everything? Escape from every charge. How did that happen? How does it happen that he was once a president of the United States, now might be again a president of the United States as he's running for president and clearly has the nomination of one of our 2 major political parties, when this guy, one judge has called him a rapist, another judge, another court has declared that he's a total fraud, a fake, a crook, a thief. He is going to be odds-on favorite to be president of the United States. Where are the Democrats in dealing with this? Why haven't they gone after him harder than they have ever in the past? The Republicans are foolish. They sound foolish. They sound fraudulent. They sound really, really weak. I mean, Nikki Haley, that's a perfect example. The daughter of immigrants. And she says, oh, that's not helpful. I mean, she's not helpful.
No, it really is. It is, again, not helpful. It's also fascinating what Mike said, Susan, that Donald Trump's never been held accountable. He's never been held accountable for anything, and his supporters are so shocked and stunned that there are all these lawsuits, all of these cases, all of these charges that have been brought against him, when we were saying here in 2019 that if he lost in 2020, he would run again so he could say, oh, they're only coming after me. They're only bringing these charges against me, which people knew were coming. They're only bringing them against me because I'm running for office. And there was talk. You could look in the Washington Post. You could look in the USA Today. You can look in the New York Times. There were people that were telegraphing this, saying, well, yeah, he may run again, if only to be able to use it as a shield against the prosecutions that he knows are coming.
Yeah, and of course he's seeking to delay a quick Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity. That's one of the big cases coming up. If he succeeds in having kind of the regular order, which means a slower process, the delay is victory, I think, this year for Donald Trump, because it would put him in position, if he wins the election in 11 months, that he could dismiss these, order the Justice Department to not pursue these charges against him. You know, one question I have is, we've seen this phenomenon where all these indictments have not affected Trump's support. It's in fact solidified Trump's support. Does a conviction, there's a conviction on some of these serious charges before the election, does that have a different effect? Does that have a kind of reckoning effect that will prompt some voters who have not yet changed their view on Trump to reconsider their support? And that's a question I don't know the answer to. I wonder if you know.
I've seen, Mark Leibovich, I've seen some reporting that suggests, recent polls, that it doesn't have an impact. We'd heard
POV, when you want to make a special gift even more special, this is the perfect addition to any gift. London Limited's gift wrapping paper is perfect for any occasion. With a matte or glossy finish, and made from 90 GSM fine art paper, this paper is sure to make any gift stand out. And with unique designs, you're sure to find the perfect paper to match any gift. Upgrade your gift wrapping game today and make every gift special. Buy 2 and get another one half off. Visit TikTok Shop London Limited or www.londonlimitedco.com.
Every second, every minute, man, I swear that she can get it.
Black excellence, black habits, this black medicine, everything black chucks, everything black hood, black love, everything. Praise black Jesus, play black Moses, give them flowers while they still get black roses. Everything black, tribe, black pride, everything black pride, black lives, everything. Skin noir, French noir, here you are, black. Everything you need, better believe you are that. Skin noir, French noir, here you are, black. Every time they hear this, they gon' say he mad.